My name is Tiny, or it's actually Alistair Urquhart Barnetson, nicknamed Tiny. It's stuck with me for my whole life. I was born on the 21st of August 1942 in Johannesburg. My parents were my father, James Barnetson. He was born in Edinburgh, was at school at George Watson's, and then went on to Edinburgh University, where I understand he was the youngest cum laude graduate in the medical faculty. He caught TB of the spine, unfortunately, during his housemanship and was sent to the Malay States and then ultimately out to southern Rhodesia, and that's how he ended up in South Africa. My mother was Audrey Doreen Sedgwick, born in 1915, father born in 1909. She was a part of the Cape Town Sedgwick family that ultimately split. The people in the liquor industry, J. Sedgwick and Son and E.K. Green and Sedgwick. And my grandfather went off to Durban, set up his own business with a partner called Kempster, and the firm was Kempster Sedgwick. They had the Chev agency, and he died in 1939. My mother had a brother. His name was Gerald. He was a pilot in the Second World War. Was unfortunately shot down over northern Africa. My mother went to Maristella School in Durban and went on then to St. Anne's, then went to UCT, where she did a degree in zoology. And my parents met at the South African Institute of Medical Research when my father was working there. I was born, as I said, in 1942. I have a brother, Bruce, who was born in 1940, and a sister, Fiona, who was born in 1944. We lived initially in Johannesburg, then moved to Bloemfontein, and then moved, when I was very young, up to Pretoria, where I spent most of my life, having gone to school at Mrs. van Bergen's Primary, then on to Whips, Waterkloof House Preparatory School, where I did my primary schooling, and then on to Pretoria Boys High. I followed that by going to university in the United States, at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, and then returned to South Africa in 1964. Whilst at SMU in Dallas, I did an undergraduate degree in business, a Bachelor of Business Administration with a major in accounting. I was involved heavily in the swimming program, which I'll deal with later. But despite the fact that I had a fantastic time in the United States, going to various different states during the course of my vacation periods, never returned during the 4 years that I was there, I had every intention of returning home. And I came back in 1964, took a job in a construction company where I lasted for 18 months, but then realized I needed a professional qualification. So I signed up articles for 3 years, studied at night, and qualified as a chartered accountant in 1969. In the meantime, I had met my dear beloved wife, Jan. She was Janet Mary Murray when I met her, one of a twin, her sister Nan. And there were 4 daughters there. She was the oldest daughter of Anton and Anne Murray, and we got married in 1967. That was a particularly big year for me, having got married and started a new job and so on. And then in 1969, one of the biggest years of my life, I qualified, took on another new job. And of course, the big event of the year was the birth of our first child, Murray James. That was in November 1969. I've been asked to comment on events that impacted on my life, and probably the first one took place when I arrived at Pretoria Boys High in Standard 6. Whilst I had participated in almost everything at Whips, the area in which I had done best was in swimming. And I was looking forward to a swimming career at Pretoria Boys High. And there was an announcement to go and try out for the team on a Saturday morning. And I arrived there as an under 13, and they had a series of trial runs before, and I was in the very last heat of the under 13s. There were 48 candidates who were trying out for the team, and I won my race, and the coach who was timing it, who was the head of swimming, called me out of the pool, and he had made all the boys wait until then. And he called them all together, and he told me to stand next to him. And then he shouted out, "Brown, you broke the under 13 two-length record last year, didn't you?" He said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, what was your time?" And he gave him the time. And he said, "Well, this boy has just broken your record by 4.5 seconds. And quite frankly, that really made my career at Pretoria Boys High. I went on to have a successful career in swimming, winning the South African Schools Championships in 1958 and 1959, went on to win the South African Open Championships, and was shortlisted to go to the Olympic Games in 1960. Regrettably, we had a team that would have probably won a bronze medal. I was a little bit perhaps young to go then, but they decided to send a water polo side, and that ate up the budget. So they only sent 3 swimmers, and of course then, and 4 years later, when I had my best chance to go to Rome, South Africa had been thrown out of the Olympic Games. So I accepted a swimming scholarship, and that's why I went to SMU. And that, of course, had a huge impact on my life in that it gave me a free education in another country, a wonderful experience to live in another country for that sort of time. And then I returned to South Africa, very grateful for what swimming had done for me. Another experience that certainly had a big impact on my life is after I started work, having just returned from the United States, I realized that despite the fact that I had a full-time degree, I had very little in the way of practical experience. And article clerks were actually, to a certain extent, teaching my job. And I recall, despite the fact I was earning a good salary and everything was going very nicely, that's when I felt I needed a professional qualification, and took that very, very important decision to go back to university and study for 3 years in order to qualify as a chartered accountant. I had no intention of practicing as an auditor or as an accountant, but it was a particularly useful start and tool for me in the business career that followed thereafter. Another incident that actually had a huge impact on me was just after I arrived in the United States. Things having gone well here in swimming and so on, I rather thought I had already arrived. I got a big fright when I got there to find out that the time that I had done in this country, for which I'd been awarded a scholarship, there were other people on the team who had done the same time without being awarded a scholarship. So I realized that I was going to have to show some considerable improvement. And fortunately, in the first race I swam, I ended up breaking the NCAA freshman record and started cruising a little after that. Now, the guy who was responsible for getting me across to the United States was a guy who was at Pretoria Boys High a couple of years ahead of me. He was an Olympian swimmer by the name of Aubrey Bureau. And one day in the afternoon, I thought, well, I'm not going to go to work out. I'm just going to slacken off and have a bit of a rest. My grades had started going down a little bit. And there was a knock on the door at about 5 o'clock. And I opened it, and Aubrey Bureau was standing there. And he said to me, "Where were you at workout this afternoon?" I said, I was a little bit tired, and I thought I'd just take the afternoon off. He was a fairly laid-back sort of a guy. But he looked at me, and it's the only time I ever saw him get absolutely incensed. And he said to me, "Don't you ever do that again, and let us down in the manner in which you have." And I went and I sat on my bed, and I thought, boy, you're on your own here. You're the only one who's going to be able to achieve what you need to do. And so you better just put your head down and start working. And I realized from then, if I needed anything done, I was the one who was going to have to do it. My support base was back in South Africa, 12,000 kilometers away. I had no contact with them through telephones or anything like that in those days. I had one telephone call over the course of the 4 years that I was there. And that had a huge impact on me. And I never missed another workout and took things a lot more seriously after that. So that did have an impact on me. As far as my career was concerned, I started out as the group accountant in a company called Gerrie de Jong. It was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And about 3 years after I started, the company was taken over by a Cape-based operation called Ovenstone Investments. They took 3 public company portfolios, property company portfolios, and put them together under the name Ofland, which was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. I went down to Cape Town for the very first meeting of Ofland, and only then was I told that I was to be managing director of this company. So at the age of 32, found myself as the managing director of a listed property company with all the responsibilities that went with it. It was an exciting time, and we had to change direction because Ovenstones, who were primarily invested in the fishing industry largely dried up. So in order to generate the revenue that they required for dividends, they turned to the property division, and we had to perform year after year after year. I held that position for a period of 22 years, ultimately retiring from it in 1996. And what we did there is we covered property development right across the full spectrum of South Africa, from township development on the one end down to downtown rental producing buildings on the other. I got involved in various representative organizations, ended up chairing the South African Property Owners Association as president, and sat on various public company boards. But during that time, I also developed an interest in the hospitality industry, acquiring an interest in a hotel called Mount Sheba in the Mpumalanga province, together with my partner, Graham Ledger. If I had to design a perfect partner, I don't think I could design any better. He was a qualified hotelier, so he and I always did everything 50-50, and he looked after our interests at Mount Sheba while I continued with my job at Ofland. We expanded our portfolio ultimately to a group of 7 boutique hotels, which we then sold in 1996. And then in 1996, the same year, I founded the Prue Leith Chefs Academy, which is a business that we still own and operate. And I have to say I'm extremely proud of it, and I can say this because it wasn't really my contribution that elevated it to the business that it is today. It probably stands as the best chef's academy in the country, and that has been as a result of the efforts of some extraordinary people who we took on. And I have to mention here in particular Adela Stieler van der Westhuizen, who is the managing director of the company and who has been absolutely outstanding in ensuring that we maintain the highest possible standards. It also introduces the link that we made with Prue Leith. Now, Prue Leith is a South African who went over to the UK many years ago and established a wonderful reputation in the food industry. So much so that she was awarded an OBE, which was ultimately elevated to a CBE by the Queen. That was for her contribution to the food industry. When we started this business, I knew that we didn't have any credibility in the food education line. We did have credibility in the hospitality industry, but what was going to persuade a parent to send their child on an expensive course to us? So we realized that we needed a leg up. And the first name that came to mind was to ask Prue Leith to become a patron. I didn't know her, but I knew her cousin Steve Leith in Cape Town. I recall sending Prue a telex saying, look, I know this is very impertinent of me, but this is what we want to do, establishing this college. And I said, the one thing that we don't need is money, because people get turned off by monetary requests. I then went down to Mount Sheba, where I was incommunicado for about 3 days. And when I came back to Pretoria, I was astounded that she had tried to contact me 3 times. That started a wonderful relationship, first conducted by telex. Her husband was an attorney by the name of Rain Kruger, very well known as a South African author, and one of the books he wrote was Goodbye, Dolly Gray. So he and I negotiated the agreement, and then we ultimately went over to London to meet her. She agreed to become the patron of the Academy, which has had a huge impact on us, gave us credibility from day one, assisted us with the development of the curriculum and so on. And it's been a fantastic relationship ever since. She's extremely proud of this operation. It's very much what she wanted. And despite the fact she doesn't have equity in the business, she still continues to be our patron. We're delighted to have her on board. I have had a lifelong interest in education, having become involved in the school councils of both Whips and St. Albans College, which Jan's father was the founder headmaster of, and ended up serving as the chairman of both of those schools on 3 different occasions. And I found that this put me in very good stead for the educational aspect of the academy that we started here, and have retained those positions on those councils ever since. I got involved in the master swimming program, which is an age group related thing, for about 10 or 15 years, which gave me the opportunity of returning to swimming. I ended up winning the South African Championship in those and broke a world record in one of them. And then during the course of my career in the United States, I ended up being an All-American swimmer for the 3 years in which I qualified, broke the NCAA record in 1963, was ranked #1 in the United States in that particular year. So these are things of which I am proud and did have a considerable impact on my life. I did find while I was in the United States and training at the highest level that my academic performance seemed to travel in parallel with my physical condition. And it indicated to me that remaining in good physical condition was probably a very good thing. So I have followed a program of regular exercise, aerobic type exercise ever since then. And I'm very pleased to say that our children have followed on with that. I mentioned the birth of Murray in 1969, which was a huge event, but that of course was followed by an equally huge event, the birth of our first daughter, Angela, in 1971, and again our second daughter, Fiona, and that was in 1972. They then went on to qualify. 2 of them became chartered accountants, and one has gone heavily into nutrition. Married, we couldn't ask for more when it comes to our sons and daughter-in-law. They've produced 7 wonderful grandchildren, and probably the most gratifying thing for me, and I'm sure for Jan, is the degree to which they seem to like to spend time with us and the extent to which we get invited to participate with them on vacations and various other things, and to watch and participate in the growth of the grandchildren. I think what I've discovered is that nothing of any consequence really comes without hard work. Huge effort needs to be invested in things, regardless of whether it's a career or whether it's a relationship or whatever. And it's always rewarding when that effort is invested, when there is a return. I also believe that one needs to retain a sense of humor. I seem to pick that up from both my mother and father, who laughed a lot, and a brother who is intensely funny. And so I have found that even these days, I suddenly burst out laughing when I think back on some events that have taken place in my life. And so when I think about that, it has largely been a very happy existence. This has been obviously contributed by the family that I have around me, my children, what a wonderful wife who's been supportive of me over so many years. The fact that we've been married now for 52 years. And hopefully, having retained reasonably good health, it looks like it may go on for quite a while. One never knows. One just has to hope for the best in that regard. But things that makes one happy, I think, is the reward that one gets for effort, and in particular, the support and relationship that one enjoys with one family. I think one of the difficulties that we have when contemplating being filmed for an exercise like this is we as South Africans are disinclined to talk about one's successes, but you couldn't really get a balanced view, I suppose, without having mentioned them. So in some respects, one rather apologizes for that. But what I haven't done is explain some of the fairly numerous failures that I've had, and there have been quite a few of them. Fortunately, none of them serious enough to completely floor me. And I don't think one would have had a fully rounded life without having had those failures. But I have certainly learned from them and hopefully taken those experiences and turned them into something positive. I've always, I think, taken a view in life that you are going to have something negative, but always try and find the positives in them and you'll find something to build on. I think if there's one deep regret that I have, it's that I didn't spend enough time with my mom and my dad and the only grandparent that I knew who we nicknamed Dear, because each of them had extraordinarily interesting lives. And whilst I know a bit about it, I now deeply regret the fact that I never sat with them and captured far more of their lives than I did. And hopefully this exercise will convey that message to you. Spend time with your parents, find out about them, and perhaps when your time comes, participate in something like this so that we will not be forgotten. I think the older we get, the more we realize how things have changed. The way we went about things have changed very, very substantially. A great deal of this has had to do with the discovery of the microchip and all of the developments that have taken place thereafter. So in terms of providing advice to, for example, my grandchildren, I don't think there's a great deal that I can impart to them on how to go about things, what sort of careers to follow and so on, other than to say, go back and just ensure that you attend to the fundamentals. And that is consideration of others, honesty and integrity at all times. These will never fail you. But as to how you implement them with the current techniques and so on, that's really up to you to work it out. The question is asked about whether life has got easier or whether it's got harder. As I said a little earlier, with the development of the microchip and so on and the accumulation of knowledge, it absolutely baffles me the extent and amount of material that young people have to cover today in comparison with what we had to. Life was much easier, I think, in our day with smaller curricula. The subjects were not as large as they are today. But it's amazing how young people can adapt and what capacity they have to be able to absorb all of this information. And I've been astounded at the performance of my grandchildren, who've performed exceptionally well and have absorbed far more information than we did when we were young. But somehow or another, we seem to have adapted. There still does seem to be a contribution that we can make. And I'm very grateful here at our business that despite the fact we've handed it over to younger people to run, they still seem to defer to us from time to time for wisdom and experience and so on, which they by definition cannot have gained. When I look at the parenting of children today, it must be very difficult. There are so many new things that they have to deal with and so on, and a vast range of interests and so on that they have to cover. The security system worldwide has changed. You're not as free as we were to go out on our bicycles and ride around and so on. And so I think the parenting exercise has become far more difficult. But parents have become far more professional in their approach in this regard too. And whilst I don't think we disregarded our responsibilities when we were younger and we had our children, it's wonderful to see how responsibly they are attending to this particular task, our children are. Yeah, in response to the question as to what advice I would give my children and my grandchildren and so on, is first of all that there's no substitute for hard work. As I said earlier, nothing of consequence really comes without hard work. And secondly, that you're responsible for yourself. Don't look to blaming others for things that go wrong in your life. It's only you who are going to be able to correct them. And if you can understand that and get on with your lives and take responsibility for yourselves, which you all have shown a wonderful ability to do, then I think your futures are largely assured. You're capable, you're intelligent, you have broad interests, you've come with good educations and so on. So there are huge opportunities ahead of you, and I do hope that you capitalize on them. My name is Alistair Urquhart Barnardson, generally referred to as Tiny Barnardson, and I will not be forgotten.